Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you? It is Monday, the Monday after Thanksgiving. Does that make it Cyber Monday? Is that which I forget where they play? I mean, I assume so. If Black Friday is there, and then when they had Small Business Saturday, this is Cyber Monday. Yesterday was, I don't remember what day it is, Sunday. It feels like Tuesday. I don't know. So we're all screwed up here. Are you ready for another show? If so, please come to the Daily Kos Radio, Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, and take the microphone. Because, I don't know. It doesn't matter. It'll be okay. Our usual stabilizers are on hand. That means, of course, Bill in Portland, Maine tweets our morning tweet to get us started, and that'll occupy the next 30 seconds or so if I really stretch it out. Daily Kos Radio is live now. That's what I've just said. He says the same thing. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Spends 2 hours voting illegally millions of times to show how easy it is. Yeah, that's where we now stand. And, of course, we have Greg Dworkin. Wow, Greg is ready to go. He's got a stack of stories, I guess, saved up over the weekend, and we missed him at the end of last week. By the way, if you were not with us, or you were cooking, or you were asleep, we did put out a all-new, pre-taped show on Friday. Be sure to check it out. Pick up the podcast if you happen to have missed it. What do we do? I don't know. What do we do any day? Donald Trump is crazy, and we have to cover it closely, because apparently he's the president-elect. All right, Greg, I guess you're brimming with stories this morning.
Hey, good morning.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay.
Had a little technical glitch here. I just wrote at the end there, keep talking. This is the only way for me to listen this morning.
That's all right.
And I'll pretend I'm not here until you're ready for me.
Oh, all right. Well, yeah, look, there's the note now. Okay, well, hang on, if you like. I thought, I just saw the phone ring here, and I said, oh, wow, he's really ready to go here. Okay. Okay, well, that's all right. We don't have that much to gloss over as usual this morning. Last night, the big Twitter stories beginning last night and lasting into the morning. Donald Trump is bananas, and he's either too crazy to take over as president, or all the people who say, hey, something might be wrong with the election results and they deserve some attention, have been instantly elevated to very serious person status. Or, of course, as is always possible in Washington, D.C., the president-elect is never crazy no matter what he says, because he's a very serious person. That's the only kind of person allowed to become president-elect, so that's all the inquiry we need to do. And the rest of you are Vinny from the Bronx and should shut up.
Yeah, also known as Power Matters.
Yeah.
You know, it's an interesting evolution of this, and it's way more than a Twitter story.
Yes.
So, as you know, over the last week and since the election, but especially since California votes started to come in, it's been pretty clear that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by more than 2 million votes.
Yeah.
And actually, it's going to, in the end, probably be close to 3 percentage points, or in other words, it's going to match the national polls.
What? The polls are right?
Apparently. The state polls were wrong,
well,
and that's why everybody, including the Trump campaign, thought that Clinton would win the election. But in the end, there were issues, including rural voters voting in higher numbers than people expected, but especially with Jim Comey sweeping in 11 days before the election and essentially destroying the Clinton campaign strategy of trying to woo over Republican disaffected voters. And in fact, that's something that's well worth a discussion all of its own as to whether that was a good strategy or a bad strategy. It was a get as many votes as possible and try to get a mandate strategy, but it failed. And what happened is that 90% of Republicans in the end voted for Trump anyway. The head scratcher that says that how can people vote for this guy who's clearly unqualified? And in fact, they knew that he was unqualified. They said so, but voted for him anyway because he wasn't Clinton, because emails, because that's all people talked about for 600 days.
Yeah.
And so that's the background. And as people point out on the internet, especially as, for example, Twitter, Facebook, and other people start to discuss back and forth, well, Clinton actually won the popular vote, and she wasn't nearly as bad as you guys make her out to be. Everybody with priors who wants to claim that Clinton was awful and I told you so is going to use the election to say, see, I told you so. But in fact, you can't call her completely unpopular because more people voted for her than the other guy. And, things like that kept reality-based people back into, look, the Electoral College is a thing. There's no question that he won. But he doesn't have a mandate because he didn't win the popular vote. And that has oozed into Trump's ear, and he hates it. And so he started tweeting things like the popular vote doesn't count. And the latest yesterday was, as the Washington Post put it, Trump makes baseless claim that millions voted illegally for Clinton. That is to say, the only reason she won is because a whole bunch of people voted illegally for her. Now, that's an outrageous thing to say. It's an untrue thing to say. And it's more than just tweeting it. It's now a quiz, a test of the media to see how they handle assertions which are clearly wrong. And so this morning's pundit roundup, I'm doing Mondays now, by the way, is baseless claims versus no evidence versus lying. And I have a number of headlines from that to make the point. New York Times, Trump claims millions voted illegally, citing no evidence. And he made the unsubstantiated claim. Notice the words being used.
Yes.
During a series of Twitter posts in which he railed against a push for a recount in 3 states. And we can get to the recount in a minute. Trump makes baseless claim that millions voted illegally for Clinton, says the Washington Post. President-elect Donald Trump parroted a widely debunked accusation that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote because of massive voter fraud, creating even more consternation around the election results as Green Party candidate Jill Stein leads calls for recounts. Politico. Trump's baseless assertions of voter fraud called stunning without putting forth any evidence. The president-elect says he actually won the popular vote. Folks, this is how the media needs to handle Trump going forward from now on. LA Times, Trump falsely claims that millions voted illegally, costing him the popular vote. Can you imagine if the media had actually handled Trump this way from the beginning?
It might have been nice, although, we all know what his supporters do with that. But, in between his fervent supporters and people who had already been convinced to vote for Hillary Clinton or anyone other than Donald Trump, there were several million people that broke late for Trump and might have broken differently if...
Right. And that's really my point. It doesn't, and it has never mattered what Trump voters think. It's what everybody else thinks. And it's those I'm not sure voters that this matters with, and it's those I'm not sure voters who broke for Trump late that Comey affected the most. His regular voters don't care about what Comey says. They already, quote, knew, end quote, it was all true and that she needed to be locked up. It's the large majority of people who actually affect elections. Don't forget, in 3 key states, total, we're talking about 100,000 some odd voters that change the election in an election where Clinton wins by 2 million. So, people want to gloss over that and says, well, it's done, and clearly it was a big win for him because look at the size of the Electoral College and that's all that matters. No, all of it matters. And so the outrage is not going away with how the election turned out. And then when the media starts to treat Trump as if he's a serial liar, which, by the way, they should have done from the beginning, it's on the one hand at least a little bit hopeful going forward that this is how things will happen, but also absolutely aggravating and outrageous that this hadn't happened from the beginning. Here's a couple of more examples and then some discussion. This is BUR News, WBUR. Trump makes unfounded claim that millions voted illegally for Clinton. And the actual headline in the Washington Post I see now is Trump pushes conspiracy theory that millions voted illegally for Clinton. So all of that is covered. I also see corrections. The Wall Street Journal first put Trump takes aim at millions of voters, which was rather anodyne, got criticized roundly for it in Twitter, and then changed it to Trump alleges that millions of people voted illegally. President-elect Donald Trump dismissed charges his victory was illegitimate, alleging without evidence that he would have won the popular vote if not for people who voted illegally. This isn't difficult, and it raises the whole question, which those of us who are veterans of the Bush administration, and remembering some of the reporters from the Associated Press, who we used to call stenographers, gets down to the whole thing. CBS, by the way, did the same thing, an anodyne tweet and then a alleged without facts tweet afterwards. Are reporters supposed to be stenographers writing down what people in power say because that's their job? And I've seen people argue that point, reporters that is. Or are they supposed to be fact checkers who say that when something is completely and totally wrong and made up, you're supposed to tell your readers that it's completely and totally made up? And to hell with the fact that hardcore Trump supporters will just dismiss you. That's not the point of what you do. Yeah. And so it's a hugely important discussion. And one of the people that really had a great piece on this was Jay Rosen, who's writing from Storify. I have that included. Evidence-based versus accusation-driven reporting. He's using a different example, but it gets down to the same thing. My exchange, he says, with a journalist at USA Today illustrates what a struggle it's going to be to get this distinction established in news coverage after the 2016 election. Although, if they keep doing what they do today, I think we'll be in much better shape. This article in USA Today, Jay writes, came across my social feed a few days ago. Trump supporters target George Soros over protests. It's about the accusation in some quarters on the right that Soros is behind the protests that sprang up after the election that made Donald Trump president-elect. On Apple News, the headline was George Soros blamed for secretly funding Trump protests. None of the 1,300 words in the article presents any evidence that this charge is true. Seriously, none. The entire plot of the piece is that accusations have been made. The people accused say the charges are baseless, and USA Today found zero evidence to undermine their defense. The accusers include some of the least reliable people on the Internet, including the notorious fantasist Alex Jones of the InfoWars site, who, by the way, is driving some of these illegal votes tweets, and who, by the way, his website is just doing bonkers great after the election, so he's thrilled. And Jay Rosen points out, if you're evidence-based, you lead with the lack of evidence for explosive or insidious charges. That becomes the news. And that's what I read to you this morning in terms of Trump's comment. Yeah. But if you're accusation-driven, the news is that certain people are making charges. Yep. Right? Complete distinction. With the details, we may learn there's no evidence, but the frame in which that discovery is made remains he said, she said, and Jay has been writing about this since 2009. After the 2016 campaign, in which the winner routinely floated baseless charges, including many about the press, the unsuitability of accusation-driven news coverage should be obvious to mainstream journalists. It should be, but it's not. And watch as a USA Today tech editor responds. Her name is Laura Mandaro, not to pick on her, but this happens to be the conversation. Jay, we reported on what we witnessed, an increasingly vocal online group with plans to take their protests offline. We sought to explain why his accusers felt that way. Soros' defense and what we found out about the allegations. And Jay says what you didn't have is any evidence there was something to the allegations, so your report was allegation-driven. And Laura said, well, it seems worthwhile to look into allegations that have currency over readers, voters, and present the facts as we find them. And Jay said it seems more worthwhile to tell readers and voters that though some people are making allegations, we found no real evidence. And he says this is just one exchange with editors, so I don't want to make too much of it, but I don't want to underplay it either. Mm-hmm. The takeaway is some journalists may be completely unprepared for what's coming, even after Donald Trump used people are saying to such insidious effect. Instead of defining public service as the battle against evidence-free claims, they will settle for presenting the charge, presenting the defense, and leaving it there, justifying this timid and outworn practice with a both-sides logic that has nothing to do with truth-telling and everything to do with protecting themselves against criticism in Trump's America. That's why the charge that Trump's voters won't accept it is so ludicrous. Sure, you're going to get criticized. You're going to get criticized anyway. The only news they're going to want is the Trump news report out of the White House, and they're not going to accept anything else. So the whole idea of what's going on here is actually rather crucial for the future of the news media, not to hyperbolize, but it's incredibly huge, and that's why it's so important in terms of how they're reacting today.
Yeah, and I've also, of course, seen people point out and implicit in your note that this is something that Jay Rosen's been writing about since 2009, that the and actually even before this goes back a ways, and to see the major media have learned almost nothing about how to discern the difference between allegation-based and evidence-based reporting since the Iraq War is a little frightening and saddening, especially with Donald Trump coming into office. And the idea that the levels of garbage that they've piled on top of the same practice in order to protect you. Now you have to wade through their defenses that, well, this allegation-based reporting is the same excuse that we got. It's out there. We have to cover it. People are saying it's out there. It's what about the optics? It's 10 different ways of defending the same kind of garbage reporting. And meanwhile, by the way, they say, well, we're not either qualified to make the call, or people want to be presented both arguments and make the decision themselves. I can't remember the last time that the other side, whatever that might be, had the access to the front pages and the headlines to just plant allegations and say, decide for yourself. I mean, I've got a couple allegations I'd like to make, and I'm wondering whether I can get them in headlines. I tweet. Is that wrong? Is it different? I don't know. He was, he's the president-elect now. Well, he wasn't before. Well, he was the candidate. Well, he wasn't before that either.
You're absolutely right. And there's a couple of things that are different than in 2003, for example. One is that we are now all veterans of the Iraq War stenography that got us to where we are. Yeah. And the other, of course, is Twitter and other social media where a lot of this can be challenged. And that's why it's so interesting to see even the NPRs of the world, nicknamed Nice Polite Republicans, actually using alleging baseless, without merit, no facts, in the reporting this morning on the radio, which was pretty remarkable. Now, this is from First Read, NBC News. I like Mark Murray and the others. Oops, wrong thing here. Let's get the right thing here.
So that's not the URL I recognize, but okay.
Yeah, it's a fun one. It's a little guy sitting at the computer saying, "Are you coming to bed?" "I can't. This is important." "Why?" "Because somebody is wrong on the internet." It's a classic. And I was tweeting it to somebody else. But this is a Trump White House preview, and they talk about all the turmoil and how this is going to be for 4 years. But then they add this important paragraph, how it all delegitimizes the media and democracy. Remember, this is one of those rare looks of media at itself. There's one more consequence to the rants, feuds, and conspiracy theories. They end up delegitimizing the media and the country's democracy. Think about it. Every time Trump claims without substantiation that millions voted illegally, and every time the news media calls him out for it, that only delegitimizes the media among Trump supporters. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how aggravated this makes me to read this. And then when the same media write and cover Trump's conflicts of interest, these same supporters won't believe a word of it. Will the media be alone in this challenge, or will members of both parties decide that what's happening to two key institutions suppressing the vote is worth fighting for? By the way, who has been the biggest driver of the story that millions voted illegally? InfoWars' Alex Jones. All right, this isn't the both parties crap. One party is doing this, not both parties. And again, your job is to make sure that if there are Trump claims without substantiation, that you say this is a claim without substantiation. And he will get his core supporters to follow him, and his core supporters are a tiny fraction of the American public. It's everybody else that matters. Stop chasing Trump supporters. Don't worry about Trump supporters. Ignore Trump supporters. Do what you're supposed to do, and be the news media for the vast majority of the country, not the nutcases. I don't know why this is so hard.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I mean, I guess it's the business side of things driving the fear of losing customers. But
I don't remember them being in fear of losing progressives.
That's true too. And ironically, I guess if they looked at their database, they need to do some data-driven reporting on their own subscription base. And I think that they'll find that though nobody is particularly pleased with their reporting, I wonder how they can do it. I'm sure somebody can sell them the data, but double check. Take a look at the hardcore Trump supporters who call you furious and insist that they're going to cancel their subscription subscribers. And
yeah, exactly.
If not,
just do your job, or as we like to say in social media, just do your damn job.
Well, yes.
Stop worrying so much about what Trump supporters think of you. They already hate you. I'll tell you now. It's not going to change. So make them hate you for good reasons.
Not a bad idea. We'll see if we can get any of them to pay attention to it. I don't think
Well, this is the New York Times this morning, Michael. And this is Evan Hill, who's a Beirut writer. He's done a screen capture of the actual New York Times front page today, which I haven't looked at, sitting upstairs on my table. Yes, I do subscribe. It says, Trump promotes a baseless claim on illegal voting. That's what appears in the print edition.
Okay.
And then the next under that is no proof of millions. Internal rift grows over potential of Romney for State Department. That's another thing altogether.
Yeah.
So there is that. And then there's this piece to finish up this segment from Ned Resnikoff from Think Progress. Trump's lies have a purpose. They're an assault on democracy. Trump is winning the war on reality. Welcome to the age of nightmares. And again, he contrasts Bush and Rove on the one hand with what Trump is doing, since we brought it up. President-elect Donald Trump does not create new realities like somebody, probably Karl Rove famously told a New York Times reporter, we create our own realities. President-elect doesn't create new realities. He tells lies that are seemingly random, frequently inconsistent, and often plainly ridiculous. That's because, by the way, hint to media, this guy is like unhinged. And it's not hyperbole to say that, and you keep treating him like he's normal, and that's why this keeps happening. He says or tweets things on the record and then denies having ever said them. He contradicts documented fact and disregards anybody who points out inaccuracies. He even lies when he has no discernible reason to do so, and then turns around and tells another lie that flies in the face of the previous one. If Bush and Rove constructed a fantasy world with a clear internal logic, Trump has built something more like an endless bad dream. In his political universe, facts are unstable and ephemeral. Events follow one another with no causal linkage, and dangers everywhere, although its source seems to change at random. Whereas President Bush offered America the illusion of moral clarity, President-elect Trump offers an ever-shifting phantasmagoria of sense impressions and unreliable information, barely held together by a fog of anxiety and bewilderment. Think Kafka more than Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings being an internally consistent narrative that Bush and Rove used to do, whereas Trump is more Kafka. You never know what you're going to wake up to tomorrow.
Eesh.
And then he goes on to say it's not an accident. He's doing this on purpose. And this was the whole idea of flooding the zone with so many reports that media just was confused and didn't know what to focus on. And so they focused on one thing with Clinton, which is emails, and they focused on nothing with Trump. And that's why you look at the word clouds of the pre-election run-up, and there's only one dominating word in Clinton word clouds. What do you remember about the media? And there's nothing specific about Trump in his word cloud because there were just too many things to focus on.
Yeah, and there's some debate out there, and I find a little bit true I take a little from each column on this one, debate between those who think he's got some kind of master plan and those who think he's just a manic wacko and he tweets whatever's in his head and there's no plan at all.
Well, he's a manic wacko who's managed by people with a master plan. That's
that appears to be the case. And he's managed himself for many, many years.
His family has.
Yeah, that's true. And
they're the same people who are managing it now.
That is, yeah, that's true too. I guess it's just that he's never needed to have a plan before because his only plan was to stay famous.
Right. I mean, that is his plan. You know, Trump Towers exist not because he builds them, but because he licenses the name. He's just licensed his name to the White House. It's not he who's going to be doing the directing. It's going to be Jared Kushner and Steve Bannon.
Puppet, no puppet.
Puppet,
You're
puppet, no puppet. Exactly. So, will media just write that? Well, he's the president. You can't write. Yes, you can write that if that, in fact, is going on.
Oh. Well,
now, how serious are they about governance? Well, they put the wackos so far as choices for the various cabinet positions, some slightly better than others. One of the worst being for education secretary.
Does he know that yet?
Betsy DeVos.
Betsy. I thought we were talking for a second about. I got confused. Ben Carson. I saw a picture of him.
Ben Carson for HUD, right?
Yeah, Betsy DeVos. I forgot to. I don't think we got to mention her. She had been nominated by the time we were finishing up the week. It's just again, our zone was flooded. But yeah, she's out there, and as I noted, and has been rather popular to note on Twitter. It is amazing, even without her nomination, that the guy who just got told your idea of what education is so far off the mark that you have to pay $25 million in penalties because you're so terrible at defining what is and isn't education. That guy gets to pick the next education secretary. As it happens, he also picked someone who's a disaster.
Yeah, he also picked Wilbur Ross for Commerce, who truly was managing a disaster, which is the Seiko mine collapse disaster.
Yeah,
so you have all those people, and then when you get to an actual legitimate discussion about who should be Secretary of State, you have this whole picture of Mitt Romney being asked to be considered, and then basically the Trump camp, giving the impression it's going to be just like Jeff Sessions over at Justice. That is to say, Ted Cruz can be asked. Ted Cruz might show up. Ted Cruz will be humiliated by being told, no, it's not you. And the thought is they want to do that to Romney as well. And Kellyanne Conway and others in the camp put out the word that, well, the only way that Romney is going to be considered is if he apologizes for everything he said about Trump during the run-up to the election. And then, of course, after the apology, the expectation is, okay, thank you for the apology. No.
Mm-hmm. Right. It is rather ironic.
Versus Rudy Giuliani, who's the other candidate. I mean, this is just insane stuff, wacko, terrible. Unhinged, like you were saying.
Yeah. Never mind that. But I like that Kellyanne Conway is the one delivering this message, and I understand that they're playing the controversy game this morning, insisting that Trump is furious at Kellyanne Conway for freelancing on Romney, but I don't think that she's doing that. But meanwhile, it is interesting for her to deliver the message that he needs to apologize for what's on the record from him about Trump previously, given that, of course, the record is replete with Kellyanne Conway's broad and piercing denunciations of Donald Trump when she was working for Ted Cruz. So, I don't know. She doesn't have to apologize, I guess. No one has yet speculated as to why that is. I guess if you spend enough time just kissing his ass, he forgets that you did that before. So there's a path.
Hey, we're on live radio. Can you say kissing?
I don't know. Under the if the new Department of Justice is anything like the last Republican Department of Justice, I don't know.
I mean, the swear words are okay, but you can't say hugs and kisses, right? Yeah. It sounds too PC.
Possibly true. I did see something over the weekend that or just before the weekend, I think, thinking about the Department of Justice under Sessions versus under Ashcroft. A lot of people have been making that comparison, or speaking to people who work inside the Department of Justice, basically saying, "Oh, if I survived Ashcroft, I might be able to survive Sessions too." I think the Onion actually tried to run with a piece where Sessions, as the new AG, as one of their jokes, covers up the naked breast of the Justice statue in the foyer of the Justice Department main Justice building, and somebody, I think, quite quickly pointed out, does it count as a parody story if this has already happened in the past and the writers are just too young to remember?
Well, did she put a white sheet with holes cut out? That would be more appropriate.
Yes, right, just right over the head. But no, that wasn't where they were going with that one. They just somehow thought that only Sessions would ever have done such a thing, and yet that's actual history right there.
Well, two unrelated stories before I go.
Mm-hmm.
One observational, the other is a bit hopeful. Yes. The observational one comes from Wonk Blog, a single chart everybody needs to look at before Trump's big fight over bringing back American jobs. Quick answer this, does America make stuff anymore? Actually, we make a lot of stuff, but what the chart shows is that employment has been stagnant since 1980, if anything dropping a little, whereas the productivity has skyrocketed. And the point being that whereas in 1980 you needed 25 people to make a certain thing, now you need 5 people on average. And that being the case with automation and other productivity tools, those jobs are not coming back. So he's going to fail, and then what? And that's the one chart that shows everything, which I have, I think, somewhere on Skype for you. There it is. It's the red and blue one. Everything.
Okay.
Right above where I said, keep talking. I'm just coming down here so I can hear your show. And then the hopeful one is an interesting one from Jamel Bowie about keep hope alive. Demoralized Democrats have a roadmap for success in Trump's America. It was written by Jesse Jackson.
Oh.
Tells a great story about the national farm bust back in the 80s. Remember Farm Aid and all the Willie Nelson stuff, and when family farmers were just having a terrible time with the stagflation and so on and so forth. So what happened is that there were a lot of angry farmers. Does this sound familiar? Angry white guys.
Yeah, I know them.
And who made common cause with them? Jesse Jackson in his presidential run. And the funny thing is that when these folks used to come to his rallies, they used to wear bags on their head, which got him a little freaked out. But it wasn't a Klan thing. It was they didn't want the Farm Bureau to find out who they were and pick on them. It's a really great story from 30 years ago, 40 years ago, which talks about how you can make common cause with people who have grievances without saying, well, we can't talk about blacks, we can't talk about women, we can't talk about people of color, we can't talk about gays. You can talk about all of those and still make common cause with people. And that it isn't one versus the other. There's this whole discussion about the latest, thought that, the trouble with Democrats is that they're too identity politics focused, which is kind of nonsense. That's where that 2 million plus votes lead that Clinton got comes into this partly. But it also comes into the point where you don't have to jettison your beliefs about fairness in order to win elections. You have to run it better. There's other things you have to do. But if you're looking at number of votes, this was actually a rather successful campaign. What was not successful is actually winning the Electoral College, a different kettle of fish altogether. And if you're talking about those areas of the country where you didn't do as well, there's other things perhaps that went on, whether it's Comey, whether it's not making the investment to talk about jobs, focusing on trying to get disaffected Republicans rather than your base. I mean, there's a number of things that could have been done differently. The Clinton campaign is not above criticism. But it's not all about, you have to jettison identity. You see, you spent too much time with black people. So really, really interesting read. And I'll just, rather than pick and choose from it, I'm going to leave it with you for your consideration. And with that, I'm going to wrap up today's segment because that's really what I wanted to talk about.
Well, okay. I'm glad we got everything in. That's good. This is an
by the way, I have to go to work too. But
whatever. You don't have to necessarily say that. Take a paper bag.
That's why this is not professional radio. I'm actually telling you what's going on.
Right. And what he's telling you is the profession is somewhere else. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much. That is interesting. I see these pictures now of these guys with the paper bag, like Unknown Comic style.
Exactly. And fascinating trip down memory lane, and maybe there's some lessons there.
One guy has cut. This is funny. One guy has cut just eye holes. One guy has cut a mouth hole for himself too. I don't know whether he plans on talking back.
Yeah.
The third guy has cut like jack-o'-lantern pumpkin triangles for his eye holes, and then a nose hole. This is really something. And there's a guy in the back who has just eye holes in it, but he has the bag oriented the other way. He's got his eye holes cut in the side of the bag. We've got a narrow-headed guy, a guy with a huge nose, a guy who's a mouth breather, and I don't know what. This is really amazing.
That's the thing. You see, these guys are not anonymous; they're pseudonymous, right? Just like we used to be in blogging days, because you can identify who this person is
this guy here
by his bag style.
Right?
They're as unique as fingerprints.
Yes, true. And I wonder if they do that all the time. I
don't know who it is, but I know it's that same guy.
I love this guy with the eye holes in the side of the bag. That would never have occurred to me. Put him in the top.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Put him on the top of the bag, right? There's a problem. I can't see. I don't get it. I did everything right.
Right.
Oh, well, I will leave you with that. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear from you again, Greg. Have a good week, and we'll talk again tomorrow.
Yeah, bye.
Okay, terrific. This is this really is an amazing photo, and is there more than one? I don't know, with just the bags, but it's pretty amazing, I must say. I'm now picturing somebody who cuts the eye holes in and puts the bag on backwards and complains that the whole thing is defective. Anyway, this is a fascinating. This would make a great read. And we might as well just dive into it, because now I'm kind of curious about it. When it first came up, I mean, I knew what he must be talking about, but then I thought, well, the Jesse Jackson campaign ultimately didn't win. What do we take from that? But, there's often more to it than just the way the results came out for one candidate one time in 1 year. You can also give it another try sometime in the future. Keep hope alive. Let's take a look at this. Why not? Demoralized Democrats have a roadmap for success in Trump's America. It was written by Jesse Jackson. How much of it is usable now? And who could be the messenger? And who would be most effective with it? Let's take a look. So, as we were reminded by Greg's reading of the lead paragraph, we'll go through it again just to set the stage. Jesse Jackson first ran for president during the national farm bust of the early 1980s. Debt for farmers had exploded from $85 billion in 1976 to $216 billion in 1983. We do have a little bit of a homesteader debt problem now, too, right? Little relief in sight, of course, then as now. As Jackson laid the groundwork for his 1984 campaign, the crisis had become so acute that he often found himself preaching his populist Pentecostalism, to borrow a phrase from biographer Marshall Frady, to large audiences of angry white farmers in the Midwest. It was an almost unbelievable circumstance for an unusual candidate who had to make unlikely alliances if he wanted national traction. And of course, a lot of that would likely have been driven by the fact that, for whatever reason, we continue, at least for the foreseeable future, to hold our first contests, the Iowa caucuses, in, you guessed it, Iowa, which is, you guessed it, a farm state. By the way, popping up on my screen at last, the Onion article that I referenced earlier. I will share that with everybody. I just want to update you on the fact that it was Mike Pence, they were saying, was doing this. And this was dated, in fact, I guess just before the election. Was the Onion predicting a Trump-Pence win or what? I'm not really sure. Anyway, for whatever reason, they have Mike Pence drapes shawl over immodest Lady Justice statue. But that did, in fact, happen historically. I'll have to dig up the tweet that I saw making that point as well. In the meantime, I don't know why I needed to jump back to that, but the previous paragraph I was reading in the Jesse Jackson story ended, and I'm a little bit like Donald Trump in that sense. I jump from topic to topic. Okay. So where were we? We were learning about the rally in 1984 when some of those farmers arrived wearing paper bags over their heads and in a curious array of fashions. To obscure their faces, it wasn't until later that Jackson learned that they were trying to hide their identities from Farm Bureau officials, although why, I'm not sure. I looked out there, all these guys in hoods, sort of a little moment there, Jackson recalled a few years later, in a conversation with farmer and supporter Roger Allison, as recounted by Frady. But our people have always had more in common than other folks supposed, right, Doc? We've both felt locked out, exploited, and discarded. People saying about the family farmer exactly what they said or say about unemployed urban blacks. Something's wrong with them. If they worked hard like me, wouldn't be in all that trouble. Fact, you get more into this thing, more you realize that black comes in many shades. We've found out we kin. Well, there's some yeah and some nah to that, but okay. I'll leave that to others. I get the point. And by the way, the point recently made in the Black Jeopardy skit on Saturday Night Live from a few weeks ago as well, when Tom Hanks was the guest. So I guess we all paid attention to David S. Pumpkins, but people took note of the Black Jeopardy sketch, no doubt. In the wake of Donald Trump's surprise victory, demoralized Democrats have had a fierce intramural argument, you could say that, over how to move forward. Most call for a renewed focus on economic disadvantage, but some juxtapose this with a push against so-called identity politics. I don't know how you get out from identity politics, of course, if you're just pointing at a different identity, but you can certainly rejigger your mix if you like. In recent years, American liberalism has slipped into a kind of moral panic about racial, gender, and sexual identity that has distorted liberalism's message and prevented it from becoming a unifying force capable of governing. That from Mark Lilla, or I don't know what he says, Lilla, Lilla, of Columbia University for the New York Times. He urged a post-identity liberalism. That sounds like something, just sounds doomed to failure. I don't know. Anyway, just the name alone is so weighty. A post-identity liberalism that would appeal to Americans as Americans, and that always sounds like a good thing. That second half sounds better than the first. With a press that would educate itself about parts of the country that have been ignored. And again, there's some yeah and some nah to that. Lilla, let's say, lauds Presidents Reagan and Clinton for their politics of shared identity and aspiration, which, if you're attuned to the facts of those administrations, gives away the game. Reagan gutted federal civil rights enforcement, nominated judges hostile to the rights revolution, and elevated a conservative legal movement that, in the years since, has chipped away at the victories of the 1960s. Bill Clinton was an expert practitioner of identity politics with a shared vision aimed at white Americans. As a candidate, he took steps to repudiate the black left. As president, he reinforced the trend toward mass incarceration and enshrined discrimination against LGBT Americans within federal law. To describe either Reagan or Clinton as exemplars of post-identity politics is to submerge whiteness, maleness, and Christian belief as identities. The fact of the matter is that Americans have never lived lives separated from the material facts of their identities. Jesse Jackson knew this. A liberalism that doesn't, for example, engage with the specific problems of black workers or undocumented immigrants is one that can't engage with Americans as Americans. If American is a stand-in for the citizens and residents who exist, and not a euphemism for a certain kind of imagined American of decades past. Yes, okay, I'm good with that one. Even those who don't make Lilla's juxtaposition tend to silo questions and issues of identity from those of class and economic disadvantage. Clearly, there is no working with the president who believes in or will bring forth programs or policies based on bigotry, whether it is racism, sexism, homophobia, or xenophobia, and there can be no compromise with that, said Bernie Sanders in a recent interview with GQ magazine. How do you Speaking of odd juxtapositions, Bernie Sanders, GQ. Well, they're interested in politics too, not just fashion. And, okay, Bernie's not interested in fashion. I don't think. Unless, well, who knows what, maybe there's a style in his head that we're all... Okay, anyway, moving on. But if Trump is prepared to work with me and others on rebuilding our infrastructure, watch out, and creating millions of jobs, on raising the minimum wage, on passing Glass-Steagall, on changing our trade policies, yes. I think it would be counterproductive on issues that working class Americans supported and depend upon if we did not go forward. Okay. I don't think, I'm not too worried about that. I don't think Bernie's rushing headlong into something that he's going to end up trapped in. But yeah, many people are sounding the alarm on the infrastructure bill proposal. It's not, of course, anywhere near the level of getting to bills and specific legislative language. But I don't worry that Bernie doesn't hear those warnings in his own head. I'm okay. I understand what he's doing. I'm okay with what he's doing. I'm not too worried about it. I don't need to police him. To be clear, what Sanders isn't doing, says, we're back to Jamel here, not just my own editorializing. What Sanders isn't doing is dismissing concerns of identity and representation. He clearly sees that they are important. At the same time, he wants to make a distinction between compromising on racist or sexist or homophobic policy and compromising with a racist or sexist political movement. That distinction doesn't exist in practice. Bipartisan legislative victories bolster Trump and his administration, giving legitimacy to a movement centered on white grievance and white anger. Working with Trump to raise the minimum wage, for example, invariably strengthens a politics that casts Hispanic immigrants as a threat to national prosperity or paints Muslim Americans as a threat to national safety. Building new infrastructure doesn't change Trump's commitment to draconian policing. For black workers, then, the gains that come with new jobs are undermined, if not vaporized, by a larger agenda that endangers and disadvantages. A working class politics that leaves black and brown workers vulnerable to white nationalism isn't a working class politics. It's a white politics for white workers and counterproductive to broad advancement. Because Sanders puts those questions of identity in a silo, he misses this relationship and risks being co-opted by Trump. At minimum, he is pushing an incomplete populism that doesn't grasp how the experience of class is inextricably bound up with identity. Okay. Well, I'll continue. Jamel's got a cohesive point of view here, well worth airing, and we tear it apart as we tear everything apart along the way, or in the end. But I think I just want to lay this one down as a base, I think, and a place to start with these things. I don't know. I'm a little troubled by some of it, to say the least. In our conversations around inequality and poverty, we often miss a crucial fact. Not all inequality is created equal. On average, inequality and poverty among black Americans, as well as Native groups and undocumented Americans, is of a different scale and magnitude than inequality and poverty among white Americans. When white workers attain higher wages and greater economic status, they can translate this into better neighborhoods and stronger schools. When black workers attain the same, they can't, at least not to the same degree. Middle-class status, insofar that black workers can reach it, is less stable and more tenuous for them than for their white counterparts. Even if a white and black child are raised by parents who have similar jobs, similar levels of education, and similar aspirations for their children, writes sociologist Patrick Sharkey in his book, Stuck in Place, Urban Neighborhoods and the End of Progress Towards Racial Equality. He continues, the rigid segregation of urban neighborhoods means that the black child will be raised in a residential environment with higher poverty, fewer resources, poorer schools, and more violence than that of the white child. Opportunity itself is redlined. And I tend to agree. How much does that impact the Bernie Sanders point of view? We have to wait and see how it develops. I still don't have a 100% clear idea. I never did. I mean, I was pretty well... It's not that I didn't understand what his agenda was at the time he was running. I just thought it was incomplete then, and I don't know that he's filled in the blanks any since. And to the extent that he has, I don't know how much of it is applicable to working within a Trump administration and how much of that changes. Black and white workers face the same kinds of economic disadvantage, deindustrialization, an eroding safety net, weak wage growth, and poor investment in needed infrastructure. But black workers and other non-white workers face additional challenges that move their disadvantage from a difference of degree to a difference of kind. Residential segregation, discrimination in jobs and housing. Do we have a president-elect who's got a special interest or background in that? So where were we? Residential segregation, discrimination in jobs and housing, discrimination by lenders and banks. That's something he also knows nothing about with all the special banking deals he's got going on, which in turn contribute to unfair and draconian policing, which he's in favor of, poor and unequal schools, and heightened exposure to impurities in air and water. That's true too. They need specific and universal solutions. They need a politics that addresses all material disadvantage, whether rooted in class or caste. In his 1988 speech to the Democratic National Convention, the Keep Hope Alive speech, Jackson provided a model for democratic politics that balances all of these concerns, that takes identity and class seriously, that understands their relationship and interplay, that appeals to common identities and forges responsive solutions. Politics can be a moral arena where people come together to find common ground, Jackson said, though he probably said it more melodically, before moving on to an extended and illustrative metaphor. Are you ready for that metaphor? When I was a child growing up in Greenville, South Carolina, that would not be me. That's Jesse Jackson. And Grandmama could not afford a blanket. She didn't complain, and we did not freeze. Instead, she took pieces of old cloth, patches, wool, silk, gabardine, crocker sack, only patches, barely good enough to wipe off your shoes with, but they didn't stay that way very long. With sturdy hands and a strong cord, she sewed them together into a quilt, a thing of beauty and power and culture. Now, Democrats, we must build such a quilt. Farmers, you seek fair prices and you are right, but you cannot stand alone. Your patch is not big enough. Workers, you fight for fair wages. You are right, but your patch, labor, is not big enough. Women, you seek comparable worth and pay equity. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. Women, mothers who seek Head Start and daycare and prenatal care on the front side of life, relevant jail care and welfare on the back side of life. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. Jail care. I don't think all right. That's what it says. I don't recall that part of the speech. I'm not even 100% certain I'm connected to what that is supposed to mean. Wow. Students, you seek scholarships. You are right, but your patch is not big enough. And of course that's changed a bit, but okay. Blacks and Hispanics, when we fight for civil rights, we are right, but our patch is not big enough. Interestingly put. Gays and lesbians, when you fight against discrimination and a cure for AIDS, I would guess there, you are right, but your patch is not big enough. Each struggle for Jackson is part of a larger whole. He's not making an individual appeal to black Americans or an individual appeal to white workers. He's asking black Americans to see that their struggle is a struggle of white workers and vice versa. That higher wages and civil rights and affordable education and programs for families are inextricable. And to that end, Jackson proposed a broad agenda that linked material uplift for all Americans to a civil rights agenda, to the fight against South African apartheid, to the Equal Rights Amendment. True enough, well done there. That vision grows out of Jackson's biography, a veteran of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference who worked on the Poor People's Campaign in the aftermath of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, a political organizer who worked to register voters and pressure politicians in both parties, an activist whose fight cut across class and race. Jackson gave a clear picture of his view in 1983 when he announced his first campaign for president, rooting his vision in the experience of black America, but expanding it to include all marginalized groups. And a quote here from a speech, "This candidacy is not for blacks only. This is a national campaign growing out of the black experience and seen through the eyes of a black perspective, which is the experience and perspective of the rejected. Because of this experience, I can empathize with the plight of Appalachia because I have known poverty. I know the pain of anti-Semitism because I have felt the humiliation of discrimination. I know firsthand the shame of bread lines and the horror of hopelessness and despair." For Jackson, a politics that cured inner cities and dismantled overcrowded ghettos was also one that rescued abandoned factories and deserted farms. It was a politics that, because of its focus on one of America's most maligned groups, radiated outward to everyone who had struggled for dignity and recognition. Under Sanders' rubric, identity and representation are separate from the question of a broad-based politics. Yes, we need more candidates of diversity, but we also need candidates, no matter what race or gender, to be fighters for the working class and stand up to the corporate powers who have so much power over our economic lives, he writes in a recent post for Medium. In Jackson's vision, by contrast, identity and representation are critical. They ground a broad appeal that is attentive to lived experience, that stresses common threads without losing sight of the challenges facing each group, that sees diversity as integral to making progress on all struggles. This is a broad and inclusive liberalism, common vision from common struggle. This approach would have real value today, not just because of its rhetorical niceties, but because it connects to a concrete policy agenda. Writing in the American Prospect in 2008, John Powell, now head of the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society at the University of California, Berkeley, that is an awful long identification, argued for a new approach to targeting inequality and poverty. Policies that are designed to be universal too often fail to acknowledge that different people are situated differently, he wrote. What is required is a strategy of targeted universalism. This approach recognizes that the needs of marginalized groups must be addressed in a coordinated and effective manner. It's not enough to offer free college or a higher minimum wage. And again, that's broad brush on free college, but a higher minimum wage still leaves us with high structural unemployment in black communities. Free college still leaves us with vast inequality in public education. If inequality is shaped by place, gender, and race, which is to say if it is shaped by identity, then any effective approach has to address those constraints in particular. But this doesn't mean we have to sacrifice universalism. It means we have to tailor universal programs to those particular constraints. This brings us back to the difference between black and white poverty. People of all races face a sluggish economy and long-term unemployment, but this is especially acute for black Americans and young black men in particular. They are separated from the labor market, a fact that reinforces a host of social ills from racial inequality to incarceration to the production of racial stigma. People begin to associate being black and male with being unemployed. And that separation is worsened by a matrix of segregation and discrimination. For economists William Darity and Derek Hamilton, fixing the particular problems of young black workers is a way of ameliorating similar problems for the whole. And to that end, they've proposed a federal guarantee for jobs. Each job offered under a federal employment assurance would be at a wage rate above the poverty threshold and would include benefits like health insurance. Darity writes for the New York Times. The program would be great for the country. It could meet a wide range of the nation's physical and human infrastructure needs, ranging from the building and maintenance of roads, bridges, and highways to school upkeep and the provision of quality child care services. Critically, a federal jobs guarantee is both universal, it benefits all Americans, and specifically ameliorative to entrenched racial inequality. For something less expansive but still universal and attuned to particular disadvantage, there's the 10-20-30 amendment proposed by Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. Clyburn, who represents a majority black district with rural and urban pockets of concentrated poverty, has a plan for addressing those conditions using existing resources. Under his amendment, at least 10% of federal investment would go to communities where at least 20% of people have lived at or below poverty line for at least 30 years. Hence the name, I guess. Again, it's a universal program targeted at conditions specific to particular groups. The program, as Clyburn's office notes, would include Appalachian communities in Kentucky and North Carolina, Native American communities in South Dakota and Alaska, Latino communities in Arizona and New Mexico, and African American communities in Mississippi and South Carolina. As it stands, the debate among Democrats is torn between a moderate approach that disdains all identity politics except for those of white Americans, and one that hasn't absorbed the deep ties among race, gender, place, and class. Both may win over some Trump voters, but one would do so at the cost of accommodating Trump's white nationalism, and the other at the risk of being blinded by its patina of populism. At the same time, there are thinkers who want to deny the reality and force of Trump's white nationalism, full stop. This is despite the fact that Trump intuitively sees the interplay between economic interest and identity, pandering to white workers as whites and workers who want racial hierarchy and economic revival, who see the weakening of the former as a threat to the latter, who exist in a society where economic advantage often follows the isolation and segregation of non-whites. But the history of the Democratic Party contains a model for moving forward with an approach honed by Jesse Jackson that bridges that divide. And thinkers in the political and policy world have crafted solutions that reflect this approach. It respects the reality of the modern Democratic Party, a formation that represents and depends on the votes of women, young people, and people of color. Mainstream Democrats have set their sights on white voters. But the path forward the way to win them and energize those voters of color who didn't come to the polls in 2016 might lie in the insights of black voters and black communities and a larger appreciation of how and why identity matters in a politics of we kin, blackness in many shades, against a political movement that defines America in exclusionary and racial terms as a white country for white people. A renewed rainbow coalition is the only defense worth making. Well, it's almost impossible for me ever to just settle on agreeing about which is the only approach worth making about anything. But, it's a good policy, forward-thinking policy base to begin with. Needs to be a part of the mix, digested, chewed over, discussed, and available in our common database of background so that we can call on it later on as bits and pieces of it come up again. The agenda is refined, proposals are made, and we can refer back to that. Remember that Keep Hope Alive Jamel Bowie piece that we read back when that Greg gave to us? I think that's the way it becomes most valuable. It's difficult. It was a bit dense, too, but difficult to extract what I think we will ultimately need from this piece. But I want to keep it in background. Let's see what comments were made during it. I saw Michael Musson chiming in, saying, I think Bernie understands that if you hold out for the perfect fix coming from the right person or for the right reasons, nothing gets done. Yes, there's certainly that's absolutely a part of it. Bernie's considerably more practical-minded than some people give him credit for, but on the other hand, it's that same practical-mindedness that can sometimes be, well, it can be interpreted differently by people who are inclined to support him or are inclined to be angry with him for whatever reason, whether those reasons arose before the primary or after, or before even his candidacy for president or after. It's all complicated. I won't settle anything about that today. Just again, wanted to lay that out there. That struck me as something I'm not quite ready to discuss or dissect at this point, but that was important and will be more useful going forward in the future. And now, for the balance of the program, let's head back into Pocket and take a quick look over all the various things I tucked away as I saw them go by on Twitter, and then the thought occurred to me, hey, that would be something we need to discuss at some point. At some point, we do need to get a good look at Jared Kushner, and we're beginning to build a small portfolio of bios on him, but we're past due on that one, but I don't know that today's the day for that. We also have a few other bits and pieces that help fill in the blanks on other stories, and then some wider ranging ones. What I've got, by the way, I guess one small bit that I'll throw in there with regard to Kushner, there's a larger Washington Post piece out there on sort of his background and what they think is driving him, from whatever you're able to discern from someone so young, really. But the bit that I think everybody's passing around, that's included in this piece, was passed around in a tweet yesterday. I think they took a screenshot of that portion of the Washington Post piece, that being this one here. The note that Kushner apparently, well, here's the excerpt. I mean, I'll just read that. Back on December 7th, 2013, the day after David Wildstein, you remember David Wildstein, the confidant and advisor to Chris Christie and chief architect of Bridgegate, right? The day after Wildstein resigned from the Port Authority amid growing evidence that he had ordered the lane closures, Kushner got in touch with him. You know, they're not far apart, right? And of course, we heard all sorts of interesting background stories about the relationship and interplay between the Kushners, father and son, and Chris Christie and his world. But again, New York, New Jersey, close enough, right? So Kushner apparently finds a way to get in touch with Wildstein and says in an email obtained by the Post, Kushner drew a parallel between Wildstein and his father, who had also resigned as a Port Authority Commissioner in 2003 as questions began to percolate about Kushner's campaign contributions. That entirely separate from the insanity that got him imprisoned by Christie later on. Anyway, he wrote, "Just wanted you to know that I am thinking of you and wishing you the best. For what it's worth, I thought the move you pulled was kind of badass," Kushner wrote. I don't know whether he thinks differently about it now. Probably not. But that's just one bit of colorful insight into Kushner's thinking. The guy aims to have a high-profile and high-impact role in advising Trump during his presidency, and he thought Bridgegate was a badass move. What a badass thing to do. A great idea. I wish I'd thought of it. I wish I'd been able to pull that one off. He doesn't go quite that far in saying it, but in case you had any questions about how sharp-elbowed he might be in advising Trump, I guess that's part of your answer. But it does come from a larger, broader piece that may soften the edges. I don't know. I haven't had the time to read through it yet. But that piece in the Washington Post for Trump's son-in-law and confidant Jared Kushner, a long history of fierce loyalty. And we'll see how fierce, perhaps at some point in the near future. All right. Other things that made the rounds over the last couple of days that deserve at least some attention. I thought I'd bring this one up. You probably saw somewhere, anyway, over the weekend, the video that went at least semi-viral on Twitter and Facebook of a crazy-ass Trump supporter guy on a Delta Airlines flight from Atlanta to Allentown, Pennsylvania. I guess that's Lehigh Valley Airport. And it's a sleepy little airport. But okay, you can get a flight there from Atlanta. But that wasn't what people noticed. It wasn't that he was flying to Allentown. This was the guy who basically stood up on the flight, and I don't know what prompted it or if there was any report about what did prompt it, but basically stood up in the plane, essentially gloating over the Trump victory and calling people out as Hillary bitches, which I don't even know exactly what he meant. Whether he was talking specifically to the women on the flight or just anybody who voted for Hillary Clinton he would consider to be a Hillary bitch. But just your basic dumbass demonstration of you all have to listen to me rant and rave now because Trump is your president. And as everybody knows, Donald Trump was campaigned on the right of white men to stand up and scream at people in any context. I guess a lot of people have taken that away. That's the takeaway message. Anyway, as it turns out, the man has been identified, and I'll share that with you in the roundup too. I just wanted to let everybody know that was the case. This is over at Medium. We keep heading back to Medium.com. A writer by the name of, well, it just says Yashar here, but I think Yashar Ali is the name attached to it in the pocket view. And he's got a piece there. I found the Trump guy on the Delta flight. So, as he says, no need to describe it. He tweeted it out with the video, and noted that people should to take a look at this guy. And he spoke to Emma Baum, who shot the video. By the way, Delta famously unresponsive in all this. Yashar, by the way, I'm looking at his profile now. New York Magazine and Daily Beast contributing writer, and I still haven't really bothered to find out what is the structure of Medium. Anyway, it doesn't really matter quite so much as what this guy's doing. Anyway, the guy's been identified, Pennsylvania resident, lives about an hour and a half away from the Allentown airport. His name's Jamie Finnifrock for whatever difference that may make in your life. But he's got a social media presence, and not just the videotape of him walking around screaming at Hillary bitches, but identifies him by name and gets him by employer and what kind of work he does. And I don't know whether anybody really cares to deal with his employer in discussing that, or whether they think it rises to that level. I just wanted to put that out there in case you saw the video, were outraged by it, perhaps outraged by Delta's lack of attention to it, and wished somebody would have identified him. Yashar Ali has made a crack at it, and it looks like a pretty good ID, based on the visual anyway. He tried to contact him. He, for what it's worth, denied it, insisted, of all places, that he was in Israel at the time and could never have done such a thing. Though he didn't say, I never would, he simply pointed out that he doesn't want people to think it's him. Anyway, I just thought that was an update that some of you might be interested in. Other updates, bits and pieces of news, lots of talk about also the Deputy National Security Advisor named to serve, I guess, just beneath Mike Flynn, who's crazy enough. The deputy that was named over the weekend, Kathleen K.T. McFarland, she appears to have quite a history by herself. She's perhaps best known to Trump as a Fox News contributor. That's basically where he gets all of his people. That's where he gets all of his news, and he tends to be. The trend is that he's naming people that he's basically seen on television. I think somebody has pointed out. But K.T. McFarland has some interesting personal history, some interesting political history. We'll catch up on all of that as the more coherent storylines about it begin to emerge. But again, just wanting to note that for the record. And we'll, I guess we ought to open that one up and make sure that I have it for collection in our roundup. And let's see, I want to check and see whether there's any other really easy, quick hits. Among the things, by the way, I'll give you a hint as to what kinds of personal issues, perhaps, lurk in the background with K.T. McFarland. One quick hit on that came from Talking Points memo, where I guess Josh Marshall recognized her from way back when. K.T. McFarland actually at some point sought to unseat Hillary Clinton from her Senate post, but lost in the primary in that contest. But anyway, like I said, she's known as a Fox News national security analyst. Also has some history in the Reagan administration. She'll serve as Donald Trump's deputy national security advisor. And Josh notes she also tried to run against Hillary Clinton when Clinton ran for re-election to the Senate in 2006. She lost the GOP primary to John Spencer. Very memorable John Spencer. But along the way, I don't quite know what to call it, Josh says, but in addition to a seemingly lifelong penchant for dubious self-promotion and resume inflation, McFarland claimed that Clinton was so worried about her candidacy, that is McFarland's candidacy, that she sent secret helicopters to spy on her house. That is usually not the sign of a particularly healthy mind, but okay. Where was her house, by the way, just in case you were wondering where this prairie populist came from? It's in the Hamptons, and the claim is that she also cased her apartment in Manhattan. Hillary Clinton is really worried about me, and she's so worried, in fact, that she had helicopters flying over my house in Southampton today taking pictures. I have my doubts about that. McFarland's bio, Josh notes, also says this: Ms. McFarland held national security posts in the Nixon, Ford, and Reagan administrations as an aide to Dr. Henry Kissinger on the NSC staff from 1970 to 76. McFarland, of course, born in 1951, making her either 18 or 19 years old when she went to work as an aide to Kissinger in 1970, and that sounds a little less likely than usual. Okay, just to catch up on a bit of breaking news that I retweeted to those of you following along on Twitter. Breaking news, Ohio State warning students of an active shooter on campus near Watts Hall. So, that's great. Like I said, it's always important to remain active. And we've got this tweet here from Justin Kiefer, who tweets as Buckeye Cow Doc. He's a large animal veterinarian, in case you were wondering, in case that left any mystery. And he says, police still coming into campus. So the tweet from NBC4, the NBC affiliate in Columbus, came about, well, let's see. Let's click on that one. About 15 minutes ago. And so any follow-up from them? Or is that the last bit of break on? Oh, if you're interested, in our social media era, you can, in fact, watch the coverage from nearby the scene live on Periscope, if you're so inclined. I don't believe that we could do that and not be totally distracted from the rest of our mission for the day. So we'll leave that out there for you to take a look at. And if you're listening by podcast, you would already have heard that. Giving you breaking news for a podcast probably doesn't help a great deal. By the way, one other little bit on KT McFarland that was a little more scattered and that didn't ring out as clearly to me, but also very weird. And so, because weird, I will share it. Entitled here, The Real Story of Kathleen McFarland is Much Better Than the New Scandal. And I don't even know what the new scandal is. But it's an old scandal now because this piece is dated December 5th, 2012. And it is in showbiz411.com. How well known and reliable is that? I do not know. But this is interesting that you would make. This is not somebody that I thought of as making headlines for Showbiz 411 in 2012. So the real story is much better than the new scandal. What was the 2012 scandal? Is that the I don't know. I have yet to look that one up. Anyway, this piece here by Roger Friedman says Kathleen KT McFarland's real story is much more interesting than the one Bob Woodward dug up about her, General Petraeus, and Roger Ailes. Although now I'm interested in that one. Two things. First, no one seems to recall that McFarland once briefly considered challenging Hillary Clinton for the U.S. Senate seat. Josh does. That blew up in her face like a cigar in a Three Stooges sketch. Among other things, her then 16-year-old daughter, Camilla, now 22, which would mean that she's now 26, let's say, was caught shoplifting in ritzy Southampton, Long Island. Okay, that's not particularly interesting. But before that, McFarland crossed my radar. I wrote a story about her and her extremely wealthy investment banker husband, Alan, in New York Magazine back in 1995. In 2006, when McFarland was involved in the Senate-run mess, I wrote about it again in my Fox 411 column. It was only subsequently that Ailes started putting her on Fox News, apparently not knowing the whole backstory. Now I got to get this story about Bob Woodward, Petraeus, and Ailes, and McFarland. So here it is, from 2006, the recap from 1995 of how Kathleen KT McFarland somehow wrangled custody of Alan's late wife's child, who is now an adult but was 8 years old when the thing happened to him, and he was worth millions and millions of dollars at the time too. That's a weird, insidery family weirdness account that I don't know whether this is something you take into account in all this, and it doesn't even matter, of course, because she doesn't need any Senate approval for the job. But I just thought it was a little interesting bit to throw in there. Let's see. So back from the 2006 recap of the 1995 story, reported here in 2012, we're really digging here. It says, I guess I kind of ignored the story of Kathleen Troia McFarland. I guess that's what the T in KT is. Troia. Kathleen Troia McFarland, a possible Republican contender for the Senate seat in competition for Hillary Clinton. And I wonder, by the way, whether that's something that Donald Trump remembers and he thinks that's a plus. Like, it'll annoy Hillary Clinton even more if I use KT McFarland for something. Anyway, all the local New York papers have been all over McFarland, however, skewering her on a number of subjects. The gist of their anger is that she's a wealthy housewife who somehow inveigled herself into local politics. That's a different story than working in the NSC with Kissinger, isn't it? But this is what the papers don't know about McFarland's background. I wrote about her and her husband a little over a decade ago in New York Magazine when they were involved in a strange story. The title of my article was, Who Gets the Park Avenue Kid? It was in the October 2nd, 1995 issue. It's a story that would make Dominic Dunn clap with glee because it was the talk of New York society. It was one of these real wacky, tangled stories, I can tell you, just from skimming this. Here's what happened. Kathleen's husband, Alan McFarland, has a first wife, Ellen Nell Sawyer. Nell and Alan had 2 children, Gavin and Andrew, but David Sawyer, Nell's new husband, had none. The couple adopted a little boy named Luke, who by 1995 was 8 years old. Nell Sawyer had such an acrimonious divorce from McFarland, she really despised him and didn't want him to get his hands on her enormous wealth. Nell was the daughter of multimillionaire Clifford Michael, one of the founding partners of the great Wall Street investment firm Loeb Rhodes. In their 1987 divorce, McFarland lost a Southampton mansion named the QE3, among other things. That must be a hell of a mansion. Geez, QE3, gee whiz. McFarland cut off from the Michael money, then married Troya and started a new family. Fast forward to 1995, Nell Sawyer was suffering from breast cancer. Unexpectedly that summer, her husband David suddenly died. David Sawyer is another story altogether. His Sawyer-Miller public relations company was a force in geopolitical chaos. He was a power player and not a terribly nice guy. It turned out that after he died, he'd played fast and loose with the pension monies due his first wife. They'd been married for 25 years. Alas, 2 weeks after David Sawyer died, so did Nell Sawyer. Suddenly, little Luke was orphaned. Nell Sawyer had made plans for her son, however. In May of 2005, she'd added a codicil to her will, designating friends Leola and Robert McDonald as his guardians. She chose backup guardians should the McDonalds be unavailable. What was clear was that Ellen Michael Sawyer McFarland did not want her little boy to be raised by her ex-husband and Kathleen Troya McFarland. But neither of the designated couples ever took Luke. Mysteriously and without question, the boy immediately went to live with his mother's ex-husband and his second wife. According to court papers, the now 17-year-old Luke's court-appointed guardians became his older brother Gavin, then 23, and the possible next senator from New York, Kathleen Troya McFarland. This was specifically against Ellen Sawyer's wishes. She disliked Alan McFarland so much that in 1992, she wrote in her will that she didn't want him to raise her child or get back the Southampton mansion she'd won in their divorce. It's my strong wish and desire that in no event shall the Southampton residence be sold, given, or otherwise transferred to my former husband, Alan McFarland, nor shall he be permitted to enjoy its use in any way. The house, according to public filings, 6 full bathrooms and 4 bedrooms, more bathrooms than beds, were sold to Ellen Sawyer's estate exactly 1 year after she died. The estate sold it to Texas banking magnate Gerald J. Ford. Not our Jerry Ford, the other one, for $5.25 million. It was an all-cash deal. Today, in December 2012, that summer home is valued at about $4 million. So it actually went down. Very interesting, and a link here to the old Who Gets the Park Avenue Kid story. I mean, not particularly relevant, and like I said, it's nothing that would stop McFarland from being confirmed, or, well, she doesn't need any confirmation. That won't stop her from assuming office. Just sort of a taste of the weird world, once again, from which Donald Trump samples. I mean, I guess that's normal to him, but there are certainly bigger fish to fry. Okay. I just thought that was unusual news and just maybe something that was bubbling just beneath the surface that might not make it all the way up to our level of attention unless I artificially boosted it there. Okay. Other interesting bits and pieces to share. Let's see. There's some interesting follow-up to the digital campaign on the Trump side that I think probably deserves some attention. And one additional bit, interestingly, I haven't gone to The Intercept for very much in quite a while, but I thought this piece from Li Fang was somewhat interesting as a addition to the reporting on the fake news phenomenon. And I thought you might enjoy this one too. Some fake news publishers just happen to be Donald Trump's cronies. I guess that's no surprise, but I really haven't heard it mentioned. The extraordinary phenomenon of fake news spread by Facebook and other social media, Lee writes, during the 2016 presidential election has been largely portrayed as a lucky break for Donald Trump. By that reckoning, entrepreneurial Macedonian teenagers, whom we've heard about, opportunists in Tbilisi, and California millennials have exploited social media algorithms in order to make money, only incidentally leading to the viral proliferation of mostly anti-Clinton and anti-Obama hoaxes and conspiracy theories that thrilled many Trump supporters. The Washington Post published a, he says, shoddy report on Thursday, alleging that Russian state-sponsored propagandists were seeking to promote Trump through fabricated stories for their own reasons, independent of the candidate himself. It should be noted, I think, you've probably all noticed, that most of the writers for The Intercept are intent, for whatever reason, and I can't say I don't sympathize in some ways, on pointing out, as I have, at least they go further than I do, at least the weirdness of being in the position of being seen to blame anything and everything, or really anything at all, on nefarious Russian plotting. It is uncomfortable and strange, and I really wish that the evidence was more solid, although it's certainly coming from places that the traditional media have usually insisted were trustworthy on their face, though not all of us, perhaps listening to the show, would necessarily agree. But I'll say this. I understand the concern of The Intercept. I will not say that I align myself with them entirely in where they're coming from, but the grain of salt that I usually take with Russian interference stories is similar to the it might have the same chemical composition as their salt lick. That's the best way I can put it. A closer look, Lee continues, reveals that some of the biggest fake news providers were run by experienced political operators well within the orbit of Donald Trump's political advisors and consultants, and that would be worth knowing. That's why I'm here. Laura Ingraham, a close Trump ally currently under consideration to be Trump's White House press secretary, owns an online publisher called Ingraham Media Group that runs a number of sites, including LifeZet, like Gazette. LifeZet, a news site that frequently posts articles of dubious veracity. One video produced by LifeZet this summer, ominously titled Clinton Body Count, you've heard that sort of garbage before, promoted a conspiracy theory that the Clinton family had some role in the plane crash death of John F. Kennedy Jr., as well as the deaths of various friends and Democrats. Interesting way of putting it. The video, published on Facebook from LifeZet's verified news account, garnered 400,000 shares and 14 million views. Another LifeZet video, picking up false claims from other sites, claimed that voting machines, quote, might be compromised, unquote, because a voting machine company called Smartmatic, allegedly providing voting machines in 16 states, was purchased by the liberal billionaire George Soros. Soros never purchased the company, and Smartmatic did not provide voting machines used in the general election. One LifeZet article misleadingly claimed that the United Nations backed a secret Obama administration takeover of local police departments. The article referenced Justice Department orders that a select few police departments address patterns of misconduct, a practice that, in reality, long predates the Obama presidency, is hardly secret, and had no relation to the United Nations. Another LifeZet article, which went viral in the week prior to the election, falsely claimed that WikiLeaks had revealed that a senior Hillary Clinton campaign official had engaged in occult rituals. I did see that bubble up somewhere. Ingram's site regularly receives links from the Drudge Report and other powerful drivers of internet traffic. But LifeZet, for all its influence, pales in comparison to the sites run by Floyd Brown, a Republican consultant close to Trump's inner circle of advisors. Brown gained notoriety, yes, you're already thinking it, nearly 3 decades ago for his role in helping to produce the Willie Horton campaign advertisement, a spot criticized for its use of racial messaging to derail Michael Dukakis' presidential bid. Brown is also the political mentor of David Bossie, an operative who went to work for Trump's presidential campaign this year after founding Citizens United. In an interview this year, Brown called Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway a longtime friend. Brown now produces a flow of reliably pro-Trump internet content through a company he owns called Liftable Media Incorporated, which operates a number of high-impact tabloid-style news outlets that exploded in size over the course of the election. One of Brown's sites, Western Journalism, is the 81st largest site in the U.S., for whatever that's worth. But here, there's a better metric here. 13 million monthly unique page views, according to rankings maintained by the site Alexa. Another, called Conservative Tribune, is the 50th largest site with over 19 million monthly unique visitors. Brown's site churns out bombastic headlines with little regard to the truth. One viral piece shared by Brown's news outlets claimed that President Obama had redesigned the White House logo to change the American flag to a white flag. Sure, of course. Yeah, absolutely. He would totally do that. That, of course, being a common symbol for surrender, which has many people wondering if Obama was trying to secretly signal to America's enemies that he was surrendering. Yeah, that's a sensible story. Well, what can you do? Fake news. The Facebook post touted the article with the line, "We all know Obama hates the United States, but what he just did to the White House's logo is beyond the pale." As the fact-checking website Snopes was quick to note, it was no signal of surrender, and the bleached white version of the White House logo, complete with a white flag, was not even an Obama creation. The white logo dates back to as early as 2003 under the Bush administration, which used it for official documents. The Conservative Tribune and Western Journalism provide a steady stream of similarly deceptive, eye-catching headlines. "Breaking: Muslims ordered to vote Hillary" is the headline for one election post that grossly mischaracterized a mundane article about a Pakistani-American activist going door-to-door to help Clinton's campaign. "Obama urges illegal immigrants to vote without fear of getting caught," blared Western Journalism, claiming that President Obama had suggested in an interview on issues facing Latino millennial voters that non-citizens could vote and, quote, "will never get caught if they do." The article left out the part of the Obama interview in which he said non-citizens can't legally vote, but they're counting on you to make sure that you have the courage to make your voice heard if you can vote, is what he's talking about here. The hits go on, with posts on a regular basis making claims ranging from the assertion that Clinton went on a drug holiday before the Las Vegas presidential debate to rumors that Obama's birth certificate is under serious scrutiny at last. Thanks to views sourced largely from referrals from Facebook, Brown's websites now outrank web traffic going to news outlets such as The Wall Street Journal, CBS News, and NPR, according to data compiled by Alexa. Both Western Journalism and Conservative Tribune are certified by Facebook as bona fide news providers. Yeah, I guess that stands even today. That's really interesting. We'll have to take a look at the solution that Facebook ultimately comes up with. I know there's been a lot of complaints, not about the Facebook algorithm, but I think that there's at least one independent of what, I don't know, group that's holding itself out as the arbiter of what should be considered fake news. And from what I've seen tweeted about it, we'll say they overdid it, I think would be fair to say. There are some sites on there that, though I don't myself consider them to be among, let's say, the top rank of sites I automatically give credence to. And here I'm thinking about Truth Out and Truth Dig. Is that the other one? Those are places where I tend to think, well, I certainly find more liberal-leaning news there. That's what those sites are about. I tend to think that everything needs additional scrutiny when I read it there. I usually think, okay, I'll find a kernel of truth in here somewhere, but I don't know that I'm necessarily going to agree with the spin that's being put on this. But that's the case with almost anything. But I find myself treading carefully when I'm over there, even though it's stuff that I would like to agree with. But that those were included as either fake news sources or Russian influenced somehow. I don't know. I'd have to sort of look into their rankings and see exactly what they're saying, because I don't know. This has inflamed passions everywhere, and I'm almost certain I'm not going to be happy with the ultimate assignment among the list. There'll be places where I say that's overdoing it, and no, that isn't real, that's fake. I don't know who has. Well, it says here that Facebook still considers Western journalism and Conservative Tribune bona fide news providers. That's pretty shocking. Trump's relationship with one particularly influential online news site with a history of fabricated stories couldn't be much closer. Steve Bannon, chairman of Breitbart News, took a leave of absence, quote unquote, I'll say, he didn't, from the organization to become the chief executive officer of Trump's presidential campaign, and has been tapped to serve as Trump's chief strategist in the White House. Trump himself regularly promoted Breitbart stories, including a tweet used to justify his campaign to prove Obama wasn't born in the U.S. Breitbart News blends commentary and journalism with inflammatory headlines, in many cases producing fake stories sourced from online hoaxes, as you know. The site once attempted to pass off a picture of people in Cleveland celebrating the Cavaliers as a massive Trump rally. The site furiously defended Trump's false claim that thousands of Muslims in New Jersey were cheering the 9/11 attacks, a claim that multiple fact-checking organizations have thoroughly debunked. Other conservative content farms, including WorldNet Daily, maintain ties to the Trump election effort. Campaign finance records show that Great America PAC, a Trump-backing super PAC, paid WorldNet Daily, known as the largest purveyor of Obama birth certificate conspiracy theories, for online voter contact. The surge of fake news has been much commented on in the mainstream media, and its effect on Trump's election victory has been widely debated, with little mention of the purveyors close to the Trump campaign. And that is an excellent point, I must say. Lots of notice, and it worked for me. I was intrigued by the Macedonian story. Certainly lots of mentions of Russian influence, and that too intrigues me. And lots of interviews with people who are random weirdos on the internet who are really only in it for the money, and that was interesting too. But it's sort of a curious, maybe they thought they've already covered the situation in reporting on Bannon, but to me, it serves no purpose to separate the stories. Bannon, head of Breitbart, one of the largest purveyors of fake and misleading news stories that inflame the right that there could possibly be. Why would you not discuss that fact? And then, of course, WorldNet Daily, too, and I think this is a great notice as well. That Trump-backing super PACs, I don't remember which one Great America is, but similar to the story we read sometime last week, I believe, that another Trump-backing super PAC, the one run by the Mercers, what did they call it again? Make America Number One, or something like that. Is that like this? By the way, Make America Number One is what parents do before they take their kids on road trips. Come on, everybody. Everybody has to go to the bathroom before we get in the car. I don't remember if I remember the PAC name correctly, but just the the structure of things there. A super PAC that was paying Steve Bannon's other company for God knows what kind of work. Well, he had taken a leave of absence from it anyway, but it also happened to be a company that was promoting the Clinton Cash movie version of the book, etc. But not to mention the fact that it is a super PAC that's basically paying a salary into the back pocket of the campaign manager, which is about as gross a violation of the coordination laws as I can imagine. But yeah, I mean, we forget about WorldNet Daily. We forget somehow. We don't forget about Breitbart, but it somehow just doesn't receive a lot of mention. And then, of course, don't know how the press secretary battle is going to come out. But if Laura Ingraham, I guess even if she doesn't win the job in the end, we've got the issue of somebody who's a serious contender for White House press secretary who runs their own fake news channels. I mean, that's extraordinarily dangerous, it seems to me, that you can spout whatever garbage you want from, well, I don't even know which is worse. I mean, I imagine it would be worse if, I imagine the way the game would run would be for Ingram's outlets, or anybody else's for that matter. I don't know whether she derives a lot of income from it, but let's say it's you could have your own fake news outlet start a story, and then if you comment on it, or even more insidious, I guess, is if you had a Jeff Gannon type Talon News plant in the White House briefing room, ask Ingram a question about that story, and she responds to it in a way that lends it legitimacy. The rest of the mainstream media is, as we know, automatically programmed to say this was said by the White House press secretary in the briefing room. It's a credible thing now, even though it never was credible and certainly should be regarded as less credible if you stop and take a look at the fact that she's the one essentially responsible for having made it up in the first place. I mean, even if she didn't really have a hand in the actual, the typing of the post, she obviously pays somebody else to do that. But I mean, if there's an outlet under your control as White House press secretary, and you just feed yourself corroborating stories full of nonsense and take a personal profit from it along the way, I mean, imagine how ridiculous that is. We've thought about Donald Trump's conflicts of interest, and that also, by the way, huge area of discussion over the weekend that we didn't get to yet. We'll have to get back to it, but we've been on that for quite a while. I think we can still count ourselves, at least partially, among the media outlets, I guess, if you want to call us that, that did take notice of the massive conflict of interest issues. I was going to say early in the campaign, but it wasn't really early in the campaign. It was quite late in the campaign, but it counts as early in the campaign because some of the major news outlets, mainstream traditional media outlets, are only taking note of it after the election, and that's quite troubling. Though again, I understand why. I don't know if I excuse it necessarily, but I understand what their reasoning might be. I just never thought he was going to win, and so it was a waste of column space that they could be spending complaining about emails, which wasn't as important, but ultimately weighed more importantly because they thought she was going to win. And I guess if you discount the stories based on whether or not you think somebody's going to win, if the 95% chance that person with an email issue, if there is an issue, is going to win, you're going to focus on the emails. If there's a 5% or less chance that the guy with massive conflicts of interest is going to win, I don't know. I mean, I guess you could do it formulaically and say, well, the conflicts of interest we're talking about here weigh considerably more than anything you could dream of, even in your wildest dreams, about the emails. Even if they did somehow contain some kind of confession, I did Benghazi and I did it on purpose. I hate America. That would be pretty weighty, but it still doesn't really, the 4 people is what it comes down to. It just doesn't stack up as big of a story with as far reaching, with consequences as far reaching as the various conflicts of interest on the Trump side. Gee whiz. But anyway, imagine though the conflicts of interest at this lower level for Laura Ingraham. If her fake news site makes money based on traffic, and I think they would clearly get considerably more traffic if the White House press secretary was citing them or discussing a story that they were at the time the exclusive carrier on. So, I mean, what would we even do about that one? And as if she puts on the White House press secretary hat and everybody forgets that she's Laura Ingraham. And I guess there's also the other layer of separation, and that her name is probably not plastered all over everything, although it was called, what was it, Ingraham? What did they call her outlet? I mean, it was branded with her name on it, which I thought was kind of unusual. But I guess if you're reading, well, let's see, there was LifeZet, right? But that is owned by the Ingram Media Group, but probably people who generally, my guess is if you're the kind of person who's generally habitually reading LifeZet, you don't look at the masthead. You don't look deeply into it. You might have I don't know how well they brand that site, but you might have no idea that Ingram Media Group owns it, and you might have no idea on top of that somehow that the Ingram of Ingram Media Group is Laura Ingraham. But think about what a horrible conflict of interest it is that not only can you plant fake stories and do it as White House press secretary, but you can make money doing that. That's some seriously bad news, to say it as mildly as possible. Taking just a moment to update you, by the way, several people have sent updates from Ohio State Columbus Fire Department saying that 9 people have been transported to hospitals amid the active shooting there. So we're right back where we started, and it will be somewhat interesting to watch Donald Trump attempt to react to this and to see whether he gives us a standard reaction, which usually is inadequate to the situation, but is all almost anybody among mainstream politicians is ever willing to say, or whether he takes advantage of the opportunity to inflame things and try and pin blame on people. Remember, of course, it was his usual habit during the campaign to insist immediately that this would be something connected to radical Islamic terrorism. And I guess there we are. Kate Sherrill anticipating that very question, retweeting for us Julia Ioffi's note, terrorist or mentally unstable outlier will know as soon as we know the shooter's ethnicity. And that's probably what it comes down to, although it may not wait for that. Donald Trump famously would jump the gun on things like that. So I'll be curious to see how that comes out. Let's see. By the way, we had this observation from Ricky May pointing out what I wonder about fake news on Facebook. What about satirical sites? A lot of people believe them too. Yeah, that's a good question. And of course, one of the weirdnesses about that is that places that often call themselves satirical websites don't necessarily always meet my definition, although who cares what my definition is, about whether or not they're satirical. Like basically, they just sometimes invent fake news, and when they're called on it, they say, "Oh, it's satire." But and sometimes it says something about being a satirical site, and sometimes it doesn't. But I don't know. It's one of those things that is difficult to define, strictly speaking, and an algorithm can't figure out whether it's just dumb fake stuff or really satirical. And things will be overbroad, no doubt about it. Places like The Onion will escape because they have a broad reputation for satire as satire, and newcomers like the Daily Current and other dumb places, which really seem to be fake news places that are hoping to escape punishment by calling themselves satirical, will probably occasionally skate under the line as well. Anyway, I think we've probably wrung about all there is out of this Li Fang piece in The Intercept, but it's duly noted, a good point that for some reason we haven't talked enough about how many of the fake news sites are directly connected to Trump circles and not just profiteers and opportunists who happen to be circulating in, the darker corners of the internet looking to rake in bucks. There are people who will be looking to rake in bucks instead, primarily because they have a political agenda, primarily because that political agenda is pro-Trump, and, as it happens, because there will be ways for them to make a lot of additional money on the side promoting this garbage. Parleo here notes Facebook flags a fake URL. There are a lot of places, by the way, that, I've run into a couple of those. Very clever in that they, you can see through the attempt, but it's a clever attempt nonetheless, and it probably fools lots of people. When you see things like abcnews.com.co, which is meant to make people think, oh, abcnews.com, that is ABC News. But the .co should give it away, but it doesn't seem to work for everybody. Let's see, what else does he say here? Facebook flags fake URLs. Sharers of the URL get their Facebook reach reduced by a bit. 3, rinse and repeat. Okay, so this is actually a proposal for what to do with places that are identified somehow, hopefully with a human eye on it somewhere, as purveyors of fake news. And then, it could be, that could work as an algorithm, right? Your Facebook reach gets reduced by some unit the more frequently you're found to be sharing information from a URL recognized as a purveyor of fake news. Well, that's a start anyway, and a good thought. All right, so let's see. A few other bits and pieces we might be able to share, and some previews of what we will look forward to in the rest of the week. Let's see. We just are going to need more time to deal with some of these issues, but they're absolutely going to become part of our review during the week. There is, of course, the New York Times piece, much shared and much discussed over the weekend. Potential conflicts around the globe for Trump, the businessman president, and mostly hitting on the transition period stories that we've already discussed from last week, that being things like the discussions with the special envoy from the Philippines, with the Argentine officials, and the linkage between those discussions and Trump's investments in real estate in those countries. But it's nice to see, finally, the New York Times rounding some of them up, although they did report on some of the individual instances, too. A little bit of a disappointment that this isn't something that they were able to put together beforehand. But again, I understand what was going on. Don't excuse it, because it is your job, after all, to inform us about who the candidates are. But, I don't know. I mean, I guess some of the fault lies across the spectrum, too. They weren't paying as much attention to somebody who was simply not expected to win. And part of that expectation was a reflection of our own beliefs that he would not win. And as much as we wanted to see him or his ridiculousness covered thoroughly, that is kind of a delicate issue. I don't know how exactly you both take his faults seriously. I mean, I guess that's how you would separate it. But does that seem fair to you as an objective editor, really, to say, well, why don't we take his negative traits seriously and dismiss any and all things that might be considered positive traits? He's a joke of a candidate. Why follow his policies Why cover his policy proposals? They can't even be covered. They're not even fleshed out enough for us to be able to pretend we're making an objective review of them. So we'll dismiss them out of hand. But let's take him seriously when we discuss the possibility of for him of conflict of interest if he were elected to office, even though we don't believe at all that he would be elected. That would be that would be an institutional bias. I am afraid we'd have to pinpoint that one and say that would probably not cut the mustard for most of us. I don't know. That one strikes me as fraught with danger, although, again, he also does strike me as a fairly unique case, to say the very least. And maybe subjecting him to unique kinds of treatment might not be entirely out of the question in terms of the fairness of it. Oh, there's also, of course, yet another Medium.com piece that we'll have to take a look at. This one written by election law expert Mark Elias, who is working with the Clinton campaign directly, and he speaks at last to the calls for an audit and recount in Wisconsin and possibly elsewhere. That, of course, received a lot of attention over the weekend as well, and we'll need to catch up on that. But that one can't be given short shrift, so we'll return to that one later on in this week and update you on all of what's happening and what the players are thinking as we get closer to getting that, well, I guess at this point still just a recount underway in Wisconsin. And I guess that's another issue we'll have to take up, the difference between a recount and an audit and what authority there really would be to conduct such an audit, whether under the auspices of a recount, and will we ever get there with this, no matter how much money you donate to Jill Stein here, I don't think you're going to get to audit via recount. I'm not sure even where you would put the pressure on. That's not my area of expertise, but maybe Mark Elias can tell us something about that. But it's a place to start, and at least holds the door open. Of course, there's all sorts of other interesting stories that we have to pick up on as well, including yet more on fake news, and like I mentioned earlier, more on how the Trump campaign did its online digital targeting, and still unclear to me whether we're really looking at a new era in online targeting science or just a bunch of garbage that happened to get lucky with a Trump win, no matter how it was engineered, whether straight up legally or through some various cheats along the way. This all still needs to be sorted out. But just as it's difficult to assign a future direction to the political mood of the country based on 100,000 votes swinging one way or another, it seems difficult to assign the fate of the future of digital online targeting efforts to what might have been a lucky coin toss as well. So we'll catch up on all those things. And in the meantime, if you're looking for all the news that I missed from the weekend, you know where to stay, right here on Netroots Radio, as the guys on the after show pick up on all the things I left out, and in fact all the things that I used up all the time to flag for you as coming up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
With David Waldman.
I already see some good stuff coming up here, including some of the latest from the secessionist rage-brushed rebels out in the Pacific Northwest, and an interesting story that I saw also of a CVS store in Virginia where the employees locked themselves in the back room in panic when two customers came in who happened to be black. Stay tuned.